an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magicians, Season 5, Episode 6. Oops, I did it again. In this episode, Elliot has to face some very real, very understandable fears in order to save the world. This was a really great episode. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. What's up, Ashley? So, y'all, I was just thinking the other day about how it had been a minute since I had covered The Magicians. I didn't even realize that it was like this week. It was Wednesday. And I was like, I wonder when the next ep of that is coming up. And then I just realized it was in like 2 days. And it made me really happy because I couldn't imagine how the team gets out of this. The moon breaking in half being this. And I have to say, this is one of those things where I often, if you would tell me like something third hand about how something was handled in a story, a lot of times hearing about something third hand makes it sound so much more ridiculous than it is or whatever. With The Magicians, it's one of those things where it may sound ridiculous, but it's also ridiculous in the show. And they acknowledge that most of the time in an effort to sort of lampshade it and make it so, okay, get over it. Yes, it's ridiculous, but that's what we're doing. This is one of those where saying, okay, so then they just like go back in time to before it happened and make sure it doesn't happen. I think that if I had heard that was the way they undid this, I would have been like, that's really cheap. I think the idea of it, I would have been a little irritated by. And yet, watching it, because the whole thing with Elliot is so front and center, with him having to deal with his fears and dealing with like the trauma of what happened to him. I think that it being the focus really makes it so that the fact that we're doing another time loop thing doesn't feel as cheap because it's not really the main event. There has been so much time magic on this show already. I think that also helps. That it's an odd thing because it's something that Doctor Who also deals with. When you establish that time travel is possible, and not only possible, but something that happens frequently and isn't something that only like one person even has access to, you make it so that catastrophes or emergency situations, the stakes feel a little bit lower than they would otherwise because you often have it in the back of your mind. Yeah, but they can just like time travel and whatever, and none of this really matters. And while that's true, I don't know why it didn't occur to me that there would be time travel stuff with this. I think that because the moon is our moon in our world, time travel didn't really occur to me because I think of the time travel thing as something that has a lot more to do with Fillory. I know that, the first whole season, they're stuck in like, what is it? The 40th time loop, 39th, something like that. And, that is in our world, but they're dealing with a beast that is from Fillory. And the person who has established the time loops is, somebody from our world, but who is now like located in Fillory and has like this whole time thing going on in Fillory. So I think that was really what it was that there was this like, Fillory still feels like the fairy tale world where something like time magic is much more bound to happen versus here. And I have no problem with the way this worked out at all. In fact, I think that when you're dealing with something like a person coming to terms with something that happened to them, a time loop is a really smart way to condense that kind of growth in a narrative so that we can see them going through the same things over and over again in the way that you go through the same things over and over again in life. You know, it's not the exact same story over and over again in life, but we have patterns. There are just things that you cope with. You deal with moves. You deal with changing jobs, changing schools, making new friends, losing old friends, losing family, you know, and the ways in which you deal with each of those when they come back up again is part of what makes you grow and become a better person. And the best way to have that be a story that fits in a single episode is to do it this way. So anyway, I didn't, when I started this episode, I didn't know that the harmonic convergence had actually happened. At the end of the last episode, the moon breaks in half, and in my mind, that means that the moon isn't in place, and thus the harmonic convergence doesn't happen. It didn't even occur to me that the harmonic convergence had actually gone through. And it still is a little weird to me that it did. I don't really know how that works. But what we wind up seeing is that the world ends because of the moon having broken. Like, the scene that we keep seeing of the world ending is fragments of the moon traveling through space and then hitting the Earth. And it's tons of them, literally and figuratively. And the Earth basically goes entirely dark. And honestly, I'm a little bit curious what things would have looked like after those pieces of the moon hit. Like, does the world get totally annihilated? Is there no life whatsoever left on the planet? Does the planet itself break into pieces? Or is that just a massive loss of life, but there is something still remaining? I really, really wish that we got a little bit more about what occurs after. Not that it really matters. I'm just curious for my own. If anybody has some sort of knowledge of physics or astronomy and can tell me what would happen with pieces of the moon this size crashing into the surface of the Earth, super duper curious. I will say too that the cold open in which we see that happen the first time and they realize that they failed and these pieces are hitting the Earth anyway, I never thought we were just going to watch them fail. Of course I didn't. So when the cold open ends with them looking out the window at these comets that are coming at them, they're not comets really, they're meteors, I guess is what they would be, right? And they're doing their magic and these things are shooting towards them. I'm really expecting something to stop them. And instead, Julia goes to the window and they're all like, did it work? And she's watching them come at them saying, it didn't work. We failed. And a split second later, a building explodes in front of them. And then the camera pulls out and we see all of these pieces hit the ground. And then when we go to the cold open, there's the familiar tinkling magician's theme music, which gets cut off by this massive explosion. I loved it. I loved it. There is something so effective about establishing the theme music for a show over the course of several seasons, and then suddenly deviating from that for the drama of a certain cold open being different. This is something that they did to great effect, in my opinion, with Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls is a cartoon that is super good, you guys. It's 2 seasons. It's a quick watch, so worth the watch. And thank you eternally to Melanie Linares, who commissioned the whole show for me to cover for Spoil Me, if you're interested in checking that out. And Gravity Falls has one of the most infectious theme songs and simply a very fun to watch montage during the theme song. But in the last 2-3 episodes, they change it. And it's so jarring and upsetting. And you're just like, where's my theme? What is this? It just really makes you feel like this isn't right. This isn't it. And I really thought that this worked super well here. So we cut from there, from that cold open, to Elliot and Margot laying down and her saying, I'm feeling the wrong kind of boned. And as she says it, she gets this look on her face. And he says, at least the harmonic convergence isn't happening anymore. But he says this, but we have, earlier, Penny saying, it's about 12 hours until the next surge. So I don't understand. It sounded like what he was talking about was a surge that was due to harmonic convergence. I thought harmonic convergence wasn't happening anymore, but that sounds like what he's talking about. And they say, that's the word that they use, which is what they said would happen with the am I wrong about this? I'm a little bit confused about this. Nevertheless, this is the moment that she and Elliot look at each other and both realize they're in a time loop, that they have experienced this moment already. I will tell you what, guys, when they realize that they're in this loop, my first thought was how lucky for them that they're both stuck in this loop so that there is somebody else that they can talk about this with, because it would really suck to experience this by yourself like so many other stories have happened. And then halfway through this episode, Elliot is alone. And when you realize that Margot doesn't realize that she's in a loop anymore, that she's not awake in it the way he is, it was so heartbreaking to me. I didn't expect to have the reaction that I did, but I was devastated by that. I don't know what, there was something about the way that the show established how Elliot was feeling anyway. He was already feeling so lonely, despite the fact that she was in it with him because he's dealing with this trauma, that taking her out of the equation after we've seen how sort of desperate he's feeling, it made it rough to watch. And I thought that was just extremely effective. Let's see. Jeremy says that shared loop thing is something rarely done. They did it this summer with that movie Palm Springs too, but there's so much interesting storytelling you can do with it, as this ep of The Magician showed. I've been told to watch Palm Springs. I really do need to check that out. I've been told that by a couple different people. I don't think, I think that the smart thing they did there was easing us into the idea that this is going to be a very Elliot-centric episode, and showing us that Elliot, really does lean on Margot a lot. And usually, if Margot's there, at least, he feels like there's something keeping him, anchored. And what happens when that's taken away? And does he know how to even operate that way? And the answer is, he kind of doesn't. But maybe he can learn if he's aware and willing to face some things. Okay. The time loop, they begin to realize that what's happening, and they're asking themselves why is it us? And Margot says, of course, we're the chosen ones. We're us. A little bit later, somebody asks why them, and she says, because we're the best looking. This comes up several times before they finally find out that it was that perfume, Permanence. So good. That basically has given them this frozen, stability basically in time. It has changed the way their molecules react to time slips and loops and manipulation. So they are conscious in this loop when everybody else is not. But that will be found out a little bit later. So we get then a montage of them trying a bunch of different things to fix the end of the world. I love this so much. This series of montages, the fact that they all end with all of these things crashing into the earth. They ask like where this, I think it's Julia who asks, how is the time loop happening? And Margot says, obviously, the moon's a wily cunt who doesn't want to die. And when Margot says this, there's this sort of like expression on her face that tells me that this actress broke when delivering this line a couple times. Like, this feels like a fifth take after they tried so many times and she couldn't not laugh. And when the camera cuts to Julia, there's this like hint of a smile on her face that, to me, I feel like the two of them were breaking up a lot during this moment, because it's a good line. Honestly, the moon's a wily cunt who doesn't want to die. Same. So they ask, what do you guys suggest? And we get a bunch of different things with the end result that everybody dies every time. Eventually, Penny brings up this dude that has, we saw in that one episode where it turns out that his mother is like susceptible to this weird, time, like illness, where if somebody from one timeline invades a different timeline, that interferes with like something with her. It was a while back. And what Penny wound up doing is spreading spores of a dandelion through that other world and essentially being like, dude, there's no way for you to ever clean this up and fix this. Your mom is going to die. I'm sorry, but that's just what's going to have to happen, because we're going to be going in and out, and I am going to be staying here, and that's what's happening. I loved Elliot's reaction when he finds out about this. So here we are, 8 loops in, 10. And if these loops would send us back far enough to keep Marina from bad touching our whole moon project, but it doesn't. We need time magic. So this is when Penny says, I know a horomancer who builds machines. Maybe he has something. And they're like, oh, perfect, let's go. And he's like, well, except I kind of killed his mom. And I love everybody looking at him in this like, dude, fucking really? And he's like, y'all don't have a leg to stand on. Don't with me. I love the fact that when Margot and Elliot come to this dude's house, she brings Penny's address and is basically like, I'm going to trade you his information so that you can get revenge in exchange for you helping us. Guys, look. Margot is so... I just love her so much. This bitch is ready to sacrifice Penny if it means that everything else gets saved. And I'm not that mad at her for that. I'm really not. Granted, I don't love Penny, right? Penny's fine, but he just doesn't really speak to me. He's kind of boring, honestly, in some ways. We know that she had been about to give up Josh and Fen in exchange for like doing what was right for her kingdom, which Fen is mad at her over. And I think Josh is also like, well, he was, but personally, I was very admiring of the fact that she was willing to do that. Like, as far as she could tell, there was nothing she could do. She tried several things to save them. It seemed as if none of that was going to work. And she was doing something that in a way was like self-sacrificing for the good of everybody else. Now with Penny, it's not really self-sacrificing. This isn't somebody that she super cares about. This is just her doing, as she puts it to Elliot, because Elliot asks her, Margot, what are you doing? And she says, he dies anyway if we don't, along with everyone. This is basic trolley problem shit, ovary up. And honestly, when everybody is about to die, she's not wrong. He's gonna die. Like, who cares? So when she does this, as much as I was like, Jesus, that is cold-blooded, another part of me was like, oh, Jesus, that is cold-blooded. And then this kid does the most unexpected thing and is like, dude, I could have gotten revenge on Penny. If I wanted to do that, that would be done. I don't care about that anymore. I'm over it. Which was utterly unexpected. I never thought that that was just going to be his reaction. It was just like, oh, I really don't care about Penny anymore. I should have, because that's true. This dude is obviously a very resourceful, smart person. If he wanted to get at him, I really should have realized that was going to happen. But I didn't think about it. Also, if it hadn't been for the way this is handled here, I might even have been like, is he the one that like fucked something up with Penny's traveling somehow? Because we still don't really know the details of what went on there. All we know is that Plum, is that her name? Was a member of the family. Oh my God, I can't remember their names, guys. But she was having some weird thing that she let him in on that seemed to just like fuck him up. Other than that, I don't think that we really know what the problem is there. I'm going to assume that it is somehow linked to the issue with Fillory being on the brink of collapse now, as it turns out. But yeah, anyway, so this kid says you've got particles all over you where you spritzed with something that nebulized a cloud of temporal permanence around you. And this is when they realize about permanence for men and women. So this dude tries to give them a time travel device. He's very pleased to help them. And nothing is working. Now, I'm pretty sure that we get an explanation as to why this shit doesn't work right here. But I don't remember what it is, and frankly, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't work. And this kid being like when Elliot's like, oh, really? Just like that? He says, well, it's really goddamn complicated, but I'm a genius. And I love the reaction that both Elliot and Margot have, where they go, oh, like their reaction to that. It's basically like, this kid's got grit, and they both respect that. They can see that he has, like, you know, earned that shit over time. So, none of this works, and they have to go back to square one. So, eventually, they come to the conclusion that they're thinking too hard about the problem. They've basically got unlimited time to figure out the answer, because they're just going to start over again every time they fail. So what they are going to do is party, because the thing that Elliot brings up as an example of this is Professor Soto. And I love Margot says, oh, the one with the pants. And he says he had that ridiculous test everyone thought was impossible. And she says that we solved because we rule. And he says, yeah, do you remember how? And she says, do you mean the solution I came up with at a rager, doing upside down shots in a fur bikini? He says, you say rager, I say problem solving session. That's how we do. We put our minds on something different and we catch the solution out of the corner of our eye. And she's like, is this actually a plan, or you just want to blow off some steam? And he's like, well, you know, I mean, it's not the thing. And so we get this amazing montage of the two of them partying. I love how the parties evolve. It's like a variety of different themes. And throughout this montage, Elliot is coping with somebody whispering Elliot and knocking. And he isn't telling Margot what's going on with him. He almost does at one point. But she kind of interrupts because she thinks she figured it out. Then it turns out that she forgot. And then he never brings it up again. So the montages of like them doing shots, there's like people standing around in a bunch of different wigs. They are doing all kinds of different drugs, pillow fights, dressed up in like ancient Roman costumes. There's times where like it seems like it's always during the day, but there are times where the shades are drawn, so the lighting is very different. I adore them in the Roman garb with their like being fed grapes and whatnot, and Elliot with his eyeliner. It must have been really fun to shoot these scenes. Can I just say something, guys? And look, I'm not trying to throw shade at Owen here, okay? But sometimes he'll say things about how he thinks women look. He doesn't say it without prompting, I should say that make me wonder whether or not the fact that he finds me attractive is actually a compliment. Because I said something to him while I was watching this about how beautiful Margot is, because she is so beautiful. It's disgusting. She's probably one of the prettiest people I've seen on TV. And if I were going to choose to look like somebody, I would pick a lot of features from her face. A lot of them. And yet, when I pointed her out, he gave me a look like I was a lunatic and said, "She looks like a teenager. She looks way too young." No. And I was like, "You don't think she's stunning?" And he was like, "No, I don't know. She just looks like a high schooler to me. No, not at all." And I was just like, I don't even know what to say to you right now. Like, I know that she's younger than I am, but who cares? I mean, look at her. What are you talking about? And he wasn't like trying to save my feelings, because he has no problem admitting when a woman is super beautiful in front of me. That's not a thing. I just can't wrap my head around that. Like, I mean, I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. So anyway, I just had to say that because I just really thought, Owen doesn't watch this show with me. And I was pointing her out to him because she was the one who was cast as Azula at the end of the really terrible Airbender movie. She doesn't wind up doing much in that movie, so it's like sort of a moot point that she was cast. But I was sort of like, oh, by the way, do you see this girl who's so gorgeous? That's Azula. And he like just completely baffled me with that reaction to her. So anyway, oh my God, there's this moment where she is making out with Todd, and we find out that she jerked him off like 2 or 3 times, and she's really like she's really judging herself for that, because not only did she do it, but it didn't help. It's sort of like she was going to be willing to take one for the team, thinking that might like spur things along, but it just didn't do it. And so now she's resentful of the fact that she did this. So 3 time loops in a row. That's right. I jacked off Ton for 3 time loops in a row. So Elliot, at this point, he sees that door again that says, "Let me out," in like blood drip letters. And he says, "It's never happening. Leave me alone." And the partying begins to become less centered and less fun, and begins to be a lot more sinister feeling. There's just a real sense of him trying to escape rather than attempting to free his mind up and relax the way that it seemed like he intended. Gradually, he's like, just popping pills and gulping booze. And it's the feel that I got from this scene. Spoilers for Breaking Bad, those of you who maybe didn't see it. There is a season in which Jesse Pinkman, played by Aaron Paul, is sent to kill someone. And he does it. And the person that he kills, it's a not even something that he can sort of rationalize that this person maybe deserved it or he was defending himself. It's a very cold-blooded going to somebody who doesn't expect it and taking their life. And Jesse is dealing with this intense guilt. And so he begins to turn his house into basically like a trap house, and always has drugs, always has loud music, always has alcohol, tries to have people over constantly, attempts to drown out the sound of his own mind when they aren't around by playing like violent video games or something that's like very loud and distracting. Just basically, he doesn't want to think about the thing. He never wants to have a moment of quiet where that is allowed to like come to mind. And this really felt like that to me. Elliot just desperately avoiding his own brain in a way that's, it's so hard to watch. So Margot comes over to talk to him about some whale shit. And she begins talking to him and realizes something's wrong, that he is really fucked up. And he says, my brain is a snake eating its tail, and the tail is another snake eating its tail. And she says, Jesus, okay, you stay here. I'll report back with some research. And then the time loop starts again. He's looking very twitchy because it says, let me out on the ceiling this time. It's starting even earlier into the loop. She lays down beside him and says, I figured it out from talking to that dolphin fucker. Everything he said checked out. We need to go to Fisher Beach. It's kind of out of the way. Lifeguard Station 17. Now, Elliot is finally deciding that shit has gone too far and he is going to tell her what's going on. And it's a terrible scene in some ways, because I've wanted nothing more than for him to tell her the truth about what's happening with him. But when he does, she doesn't believe what he's saying. And I loved the fact that when she says, you know, you can tell me anything, it's me. He's like, I just told you and you didn't believe me. I have to agree with him on that. Whether or not he is interpreting the signs correctly, which we find out later he isn't, but through no fault of his own, in my opinion. I wish Margot would have asked him more specifics about what it is he's experiencing so that she could help brainstorm with him, if it isn't what he thinks, what else it could possibly be. She is so fixated on doing this thing that she's figured out that even though he's finally confiding this major thing to her, she's kind of dismissive of it and doesn't really seem to have time for it in a way that I found really frustrating, because we know that they have all the time in the world. You know, this is, an infinite loop that will continue over and over again as long as they need it to. And I didn't really understand why she wasn't more willing to sacrifice some time and sit and talk with him about what this is. And instead, and granted, look, I think for the show, they needed her to not do that so that she could fall out of the loop, and that way he would be on his own. But I just feel like the way that this worked doesn't feel like supportive Margot. And the thing is with Margot, they are so close and they do have each other's backs, but supportive Margot is so difficult for me to pin down, because I know she loves Elliot and I know that she wants to be there for him and that she says he can tell her anything, but the ways in which they support one another are not the ways in which the average pair of friends support each other. So I'm not even super confident what that looks like. They don't manage to have a lot of conversations that aren't layered with sarcasm and irony. And I don't know. it's just she's been asking him to talk to her about it, and he's trying to, and she's just kind of like, that's not what it is. That's not happening. So eventually she says that she's going to go and do this thing without him. And she says, instead of facing your memories and feelings, you're like manifesting this other thing, and I empathize. And you're forgetting you can tell me anything. He says, I just told you and you didn't believe me. And she says, I love you even when you're nuts, but our window's 12 hours or it's game over again, and I need it to be fixed before I go as nuts as you. So just sit this round out and I'll go alone. I didn't like this. I don't see... Elliot's almost in tears in this scene when he says, I just told you and you didn't believe me. And she's about to just leave him by himself. And she doesn't know that that's a real genuine, she's about to leave him alone in the time loop. But even so, even if it is, the time loop would continue again, she's about to leave him physically all alone in the midst of this kind of breakdown he's having. And I wasn't feeling that, man. I did not like it. So he tries to say he can keep it together. And she's like, I know you can't. I'm going. And Elliot is left alone, pouring himself yet another drink. Now, again, I say that I was super mad at her for this, but it does lead to a pretty great conversation between him and Josh, which we will get to. We see him trying to party again, staring at that bleeding heart door, just staring at it and almost shaking as he kind of zones out. Then Margot lays down next to him and says, I'm feeling the wrong kind of boned right now. And he says, what you said yesterday. And she says, at Westbrook House? And he looks at her and realizes that she doesn't remember what's going on. She's no longer in the loop. He goes to like some sort of prayer circle thing, and he's got deep circles under his eyes and is just really looking like he's at the edge of his rope. This is an Elliot that it feels like is about to throw himself off a bridge. And he goes back to the apartment and he is looking in the mirror saying, okay, asshole, bring it. And there's this like radio thing playing in the background. The world is flawed. We each have good in us and bad. Every day we fight to let the good win. This is the last day. Think about those who you love. Turn off the TV and be with them. And all of a sudden it clicks off. And it's Josh who's like, were you listening to that? I'm sorry. It was just really depressing. So he tells Josh about the time loop. I love Josh's reaction, which is to reference every single thing he's ever watched that has a time loop in it. I also love that Josh's reaction to this is to cook nonstop. I absolutely relate to this 100%. Guys, do you know what my kitchen looked like during my vacation last week? Because I've recently decided to go gluten-free again because I'm realizing that I genuinely do have a problem with gluten. It doesn't like me. And I don't have a lot of time to bake. So because I had a whole vacation week, I was like, I'm going to bake, and here's what I baked. Gluten-free pumpkin bread, gluten-free butter cookies, gluten-free challah bread, gluten-free scones, gluten-free brownies, gluten-free... What was the other thing? There was some other cookie. There's another cookie. And I made a bunch of like fried, like grilled sandwiches, like open-faced sandwiches in a new cast iron pan that a patron got me for my birthday. I made so many things. And that is just how I like cope with having like open time. And especially if I were like sharing a house with a bunch of people, I would absolutely do that. And especially if we were just going to all die, I thought, within the next couple of days. Oh my God. He at some point says, like, have you tried the truffle prosciutto? And I think it was like some sort of bruschetta deal. And I was just like, ooh, that sounds pretty good, Josh. Like, honestly, y'all, I really, really relate to Josh in a lot of ways. So, yeah, Josh is pretty excited about this time loop thing. And he... Edge of Tomorrow, but really all you need is kill. And it's like, why change a title like that, right? You really love the time loop stories, don't you? And he says, yeah, and you're awake in it. You're the hero. I'm totally jealous. So Josh says, you want to get out of here? I have a place on my bucket list and it's got to be now. Which I was really surprised that this place wound up being open. It's this like little Mexican restaurant. But it is. I mean, sure, why not? I guess there's a point at which you don't know that the world, like we know that the world is going nuts because at one point Katie comes home and she's all disheveled and one of her shoes is gone. And she's like, people are going fucking nuts out there. They're just fucking in the streets and like, you know. And throughout every scene, there's this like vague background noise of sirens and helicopters. So it's a pretty nicely sustained background feeling of panic and chaos outside, which I think that's really well done. That's not an easy thing to get across all the time without kind of rote scenes of like people rioting in the streets. And that still doesn't really necessarily feel viscerally like it does in this episode. I think that the way they did this here, I could see this being a lot closer to how it actually is. There's these little like pockets of quiet and normalcy with the outside world and its chaos intruding like auditorily, but otherwise it will seem very normal in the space that you're in. And they're eating, Josh, as it turns out, is eating like pierogi tacos, which is the grossest thing I ever heard. And Josh is talking to him about the fact that he's sitting here talking to Elliot rather than Margot talking to Elliot. And Elliot says, I kind of blew it beyond repair with Margot. And he says, how is it possible to be beyond repair in a time loop? And he says, well, she was awake with me for a while. And then she got kicked out somehow. And now I am utterly alone. And Josh says, well, if I learned anything from these squishy pierogi tacos, it's that not everything belongs together. I was like, that's a weird thing to say right then, but okay. He wants to know how he can help. Elliot says it might not be possible. This might be it. Me alone in this particular 12 hours eternally. And Josh is basically like, all right, that's plan B. How about we still try and find a way out of this? And this is when Elliot says, the longer this goes on, the more certain I am that the monster is inside of me and trying to get out. And Josh thinks that's a metaphor. And he's like, no, I'm literally serious. I think it's still in there. It's worse every loop. I hear its voice. I see blood on the walls. I see this door. I hear knocking. It wants out. And Josh says, have you tried letting it out? And I almost stood up and cheered. I loved it so much. He says, why in God's name would I do that? And Josh says, I'm just spitballing. A lot of the time in these movies, the solution of the problem is facing the thing you're most afraid of. And Elliot says, what if I die? To which Josh says, what if you do? And I was like, exactly. Yeah, Elliot. But that's the thing. When it's something that you fear that much, you're not thinking rationally in those sorts of terms. You know, like, okay, cause and effect, you might die. But you're in a time loop. What would that matter exactly? What do you think would happen? Do you think that would just stop the time loop? Does that sound likely? Like, what do you think? So, and I love Elliot looking at Josh in that moment. He looks at him like, you really made a good point, and I've underestimated you, clearly. And he asks Josh, aren't you upset that you're about to die? And Josh just says, I don't love it, but you'll find a way to fix this. And they cheers each other. And Elliot looks really touched at the fact that Josh has total confidence that he's going to manage it. I love it. I really do. So, next time loop begins. And he sees the door. And he just goes and opens the door. And all of this light comes out. And I'm just like, what is all this? What does this even mean? And somebody begins coming toward him, and it's this whole production. And then all of a sudden, it's Charlton, who was in his little happy place while the monster had taken over his body. And it turns out that Charlton had just been trying to get his attention. He's like, I was trapped. And he was like, that was you? He says, when I held tight as I could to your happy place when all the scary creatures were pulled out, and here we are. And Elliot's like, you made these like messages look really scary in red paint. And he says, right, like strawberries and Santa Claus. And he's like, and blood, Charlton. Well, it was a little ominous, maybe. And what about the creepy whisper? I was trying to be polite. Honestly, guys, I really like this. It's sort of corny, but it's pretty good. I just really like the idea, especially when there's somebody like Charlton is, from the past. And I think this especially works because he's from a different time period in which the tropes that we're all so familiar with from like horror movies and shit, it wouldn't necessarily be something that he would like think of or understand. It's sort of like when somebody older uses certain language to describe something that in modern context, that word has a more like sinister meaning than the older person thinks it does. And so they're trying to say something sort of touching and sweet, but all you can hear is something that's like, oh, that was really bad phrasing, but okay. And so because of who Charlton is, this just kind of works for me when I don't know that it would work otherwise. And, he tells Elliot, I'm only half imaginary. I'm in your head, but I'm in the conscious part. So this is sort of like a different thing. I'm not entirely imaginary, which I think is interesting. I'm wondering if he's ever going to be able to manifest. And he says something about how there's no substitute for being heard, especially since I often have opinions on your choices because I think you make bad ones and I want to be able to share. So he asks Charlton, what should I do next? And Charlton's like, I think that's pretty obvious. Margot got kicked out of the time loop because she got too close to the actual answer. It wasn't because of something you did. I think that we need to go back to where it was that she was headed, Fisher Beach, and pick up where she left off, because clearly she was on the right track somehow. And that makes as much sense as anything. Elliot's like, well, okay. And they go there, and they find this real weird TV sitting in this, like, shack on the beach. And I love it, he turns it on to the Whale Channel. And they ask, what is the purpose of this distraction? And it turns out that the whales are guarding the Kraken, which has been locked in place with these like scripts of sigils that they guard and keep from allowing it out. So he says, do you happen to remember if a woman named Margot came to see you? And they're like, oh, yeah, her manner was appalling. I love that so much. And he's like, That does sound like Margot. Okay, I apologize for her bedside manner. I humbly and respectfully ask, do you have any insight into this time loop that we're in? And they say, our magic caused it. I really enjoy this because they say, it turns out that these whales are magicians. Those of you who listen to the other Spoil Me's maybe also have heard my coverage of Young Wizards, which is a book series. I'm forgetting the author's name now. Forgive me. Diane Duane? Is that her? But there are whale wizards in that series also. And it was just sort of like delightful to have another set of whale wizards here. Our ancestors made a pact with the old gods, and so we spend our lives tracing sigils into the ocean floor. This task is crucial. And they find out that the Kraken stays dormant because of this. And they basically cut off the conversation because Elliot says, like, well, I mean, if we don't fix the thing with the moon, the Kraken's just going to do the thing. Why won't you work with us here? Because your work is kind of reliant on what I'm trying to do. And they just say, we must attend to the sigils. Do not contact us again. And the connection is severed. And we cut from there to another new beginning on the time loop. And he explains to everybody what's going on. And they try to figure out how to trigger out the thing of the time loop a little early. And Margot is like, why don't we just kill all the damn whales? Which Julia says, that's clearly what you tried to do when they took away your permanence. And I was like, oh, yeah, that would make sense. She thinks, oh, I'll just try and kill all the whales so that the sigils, you know, they stop creating them. And oh my God, I'm sorry, Jeremy. I just saw in the chat, he just wrote, it's sort of like how grandparents think LOL means lots of love. I forgot about that being a thing. Oh yeah. Internet speak is definitely one of those things. So Elliot says, maybe we need to let the thing out that scares us. Maybe we need to release the Kraken, but earlier. Early enough to a time before the heist. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't understand what happens here. Because the whole thing is about getting the whales to release the Kraken. I don't understand how what the Kraken does fixes the time loop and gets them back earlier. Jeremy, you have been very active in the chat. I'm going to assume you're here still. If you want to give me a more in-depth explanation, I went through this a couple times. I rewound and rewatched this. Oh, he says, I am. Wait, what's the question again? So the solution to bringing the time loop backward to the moment in which they start the whole heist with the moon rock is to get the Kraken released. But I don't understand why getting the Kraken released fixes the time loop and makes it go back far enough that they can fix this. He says, oh, I can explain that. Okay, awesome. I'm going to wait for you to type that up. In the meantime, I am going to move on to what occurs with getting the Kraken removed. So, if the whales have the power to take away your permanence, this could be your last shot. No pressure, but you're our only hope. So he says, I will do my very best. And we see him be very serious and very like, what's the word I want? Centered, I guess, in a way that we haven't really seen Elliot be for a long time on this show. So he goes there and says, I know, it goes against everything you've ever believed in, and I understand that, but the only way to fix this is to release the Kraken right now. And the connection severs, and it seems like the whales are just like, no, go fuck yourself, because they just hang up on him. And he goes out onto the beach. This is so good, you guys. I found this so funny. I kind of thought that maybe that was what they were doing. He goes and stands on the beach and yells, you know I'm right. I know you're listening. You know, I have it on good authority that mating season is in the fall. Do you never want to fuck again? And then his Charlton is like, buddy, it's a little personal. So he says, I get it. Your ancestors made a deal, but special circumstances, okay? Just let it out for 30 seconds and I will fix this. And the Kraken will be back in its safe little seabed, and you can maintain your sigils for all of eternity. So all of a sudden, this like bubbling appears in the water. And it's a pretty serious, like, big bubble. And they watch this dude appear from the water. And I was genuinely like, oh my God, is the Kraken just going to wind up being some guy? Because that does seem like something that this show would do. That it would just be like, oh yeah, the Kraken is just this guy named Kraken who, he's a real asshole or something like that, you know? He comes stumbling up out of the water. He's like underwater even though he's got a snorkel on, which doesn't make sense, but he's adorable with this big smile. He comes out and he says, hi there. And Elliot says, are you the Kraken? And he just goes, am I the what? And then they turn around in time to see the actual Kraken. And Elliot gets smashed with the tentacle. And all of a sudden, he wakes up and he is in the meeting right before the heist begins outside Discount Elon Musk's house. And he is so excited. It's really great to see an Elliot happy and excited and feeling like he did something right. He has just gotten very few moments like this. Okay, coming back, Jeremy has his explanation. The whales have magic that creates a time loop that sets back time 12 hours when the Kraken gets released to prevent whatever got the Kraken out. If they can release the Kraken earlier in the time loop, that means the time loop goes 12 hours earlier of the time of the Kraken release, which normally would be when the moon goes boom. So that means that Elliot has that much extra time to prevent the moon destruction in the first place. It is convoluted. I had to rewatch this part of the episode to get it. Okay, so basically, they have a totally unrelated magical time loop failsafe that he is just going to take advantage of in order to get the time loop jump that he needs. And because he has permanence, their time loop jump affects him or doesn't affect him the way that it would have otherwise. It's the same failsafe. The whales created the loop, not the moon. Oh, right. Okay, it's the same. So that's what's going on in the first place. Right. Okay. I think I got you. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate you. Okay. Yeah, him standing there with his hand over his mouth, just so elated that this worked. It's the best. I just loved it so much. So he grabs Margot. I love her being like, you're freaking out, aren't you? We'll handle this. Pull the ripcord and get out. And I loved that she is trying to protect him, but it's so great to see him be able to be like, no, girl, I'm not freaking out. I have this figured. Listen to me. And they have a bunch of like safe words that they've made up, and he tells her credenza. And she looks at him and says, don't ask questions, just do what you say. And he goes, mm-hmm. And he's like, just bubbling. He's so excited. He says, slight change of plans. So we go to the scene where Marina is there about to absolutely ruin everything. And she's talking about how there'll still be a world, just not as many people. Have you met people? And Elliot says, I've met people, many people. How many people have you met? Because I bet I've met more people. And she says, what the fuck is wrong with you? And turns around and Margot just decks her in the face. And it's honestly the simplest, funniest thing. I don't know what it is about the fact that that's how he chose to distract her. To just be like, How many people have you met? I bet I've met more people than you. It's so fucking hilarious, guys. And then Margot just punches her. I thought there was going to be some, like, magic. No, she just physically punches this bitch out. And honestly, yes, that is what everybody has wanted to do, right? And then they do their thing and they fix it all. And it's so good. Oh, I loved it. I loved it so much. So then we jump ahead to Elliot and Margot on the balcony. And he tells her essentially how much he appreciates and loves her and how much she's kept him grounded, but that he feels like that's not entirely fair because he like doesn't want to hold her back. He feels like she's really grown and he's worried that she has evolved as a person and he hasn't, and tries to say like, you figured this out and I was the one who like kind of screwed it up and had to go and like, and she was like, no. I figured it out partially. I fucked up, got my ass kicked out of the loop because I was an asshole. And then you went through and actually accomplished the fucking thing. And he says, I got lucky. And she says, no. And I loved the way she said no in this, like, there's no argument there. She's 100% like, that's not what happened. And honestly, the thing is, people say, I got lucky as a means to like explain away an achievement that they made. But the thing is, luck plays an important part in everyone's success. If somebody is successful and they try and tell you that success was solely a product of their hard work and not at all due to some luck they had, they are not being honest with themselves. Everybody wants to pretend that luck has nothing to do with it because we don't like that there are things that we can't control that contribute to whether we're successful or not. We don't like that. So we try and act like it's all under our control. It's not. Luck is just something that we can't control, and it does play a role, and we just hate it, and so we try and act like that's not what's happening. So Elliot trying to be like, oh, it was luck. Dude, even if it was luck, you got like 1 million time loops that you didn't succeed, and take this win, man. Who cares? You tried, and you faced some shit that you were afraid of. That's not nothing, you know? So, in the end, they have this really sweet moment of hugging each other. And then she says something about how he needs to get on her level. And he says, I don't know if I want to get on your level knowing that you jacked off Todd. And she says, no, I didn't. And he says, yes, you did. And she pulls back and goes, no, I didn't. And stares at him. And I was like, ah, ha, ha. So then the episode ends with fucking Todd showing up. I gotta say that Todd being still around is very amusing. And he comes in and asks Julia, do you know about this fucking pig guy? And she's like, yeah, he wanted somebody to save the world. We did it. It's fine. I love that in the background, Margot runs out, sees Todd, makes a face, and runs away again. And Todd tells her, this dude tried to get me to do a quest. It's not saving the world. It's something going on in Fillory. And she's like, oh my God, we've got to save Fillory. It wasn't even this world. We're still not done. And that's the end of the episode, is her being like, fuck, of course we're not done. And I think that was a really nice moment of like a callback to the sisters who helped them earlier, who were just like, there comes a point where you've saved the world enough and you just, when are you done? And she didn't really seem to get it. And now I feel like she's starting to get it. So yeah, this is a fun episode. I really like this one. Thank you again so much to Jeremy in the chat for explaining that bit of the magic thing, because I didn't get it. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that you guys are all enjoying the coverage. Thank you again to Ashley for commissioning this episode. And I will see you again soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.